Welcome to Jesus Changes Everything, a daily podcast dedicated to providing a fresh look at the ancient and glorious truth that Jesus not only reigns, but is busy about the business of bringing all things under subjection, that celebrates the wonder and the glory that he has been given all authority in heaven and on earth.
It's Tuesday, and that means it's time for ISM on the Jesus Changes Everything podcast. Today, I'd like for us to consider as our ISM, federalism. Federalism, because federalism is unknowing, whether people know it or not, it's very much in the news, particularly for Christians who are eager to see the end result of what may be coming, the overturning of Roe v. Wade and the implications thereof. We do know this much, that Roe v. Wade, the actual decision, was a profoundly anti-federal statute, not only profoundly wicked, but also profoundly anti-federal in this sense that prior to Roe v. Wade, individual states were able to have their own laws with respect to the crime of abortion. And Roe v. Wade, just as Obergefell did with respect to gay so-called marriage, said, no, you don't get to decide. We're deciding for you. Now, it's confusing because federalism is the idea that the powers of government should be divided between central governments and regional, in our context, state governments. And so you would, because the central government is called the federal government, you might be tempted to think that federalism is supportive of giving the absolute power to the central government. It's exactly the opposite. The whole function of how our constitutional republic was established. We know, we've talked about this, or learned about this when we were kids, of the importance of checks and balances, which, by the way, ties into something I spoke about earlier, or maybe later, depending on where this falls, about the wickedness of men, that because we are wicked, it's very scary to give government power. So our founding fathers, with great wisdom, created a system of checks and balances that would not only limit each of the three branches of the federal government in a kind of rock, paper, scissors kind of way, but also the checks and balances ran from what's a state issue and what's a federal issue. And the 10th Amendment, which forbade the federal government from having anything to do with what's not listed as its job in the Constitution itself. That 10th Amendment is critical to our liberty. It is that which is supposed to keep the states from becoming mere administrative outposts of the federal government, which is, again, what Roe v. Wade did. Well, when it's gone, we recognize that this doesn't now mean that the federal government is saying that no states may allow for abortion. Instead, it means that this now goes back to each state. Now, just a few days ago, the U.S. Senate held a vote trying to pass into law a federal law that would have made it legal to have an abortion in all 50 states in the United States. That Senate vote failed by one. Now, it would have had to go to the House after that, and who knows how that would have gone. But nevertheless, it did not pass. But if it had passed, we would have had probably, again, a whole raft of people like me, pro-lifers, saying, wait a minute, you can't, this is not something that the Constitution calls the federal government to do. Do you understand that? If you go and break into somebody's house and take their stuff, that's not a federal issue. That's why we have local governments. If you go into somebody's house and shoot them, not a federal issue. Federal issues are issues that deal with interstate issues. So that if you kidnap someone and cross a state line, that might be a federal issue. If you rob a bank because banks carry Federal Reserve notes, that might become a federal issue. There's limitations. That's why we don't have a federal police force, because there are actually quite a limited number of federal crimes. So federalism is that ideology that says this is important. We need to have real power in regional governments that limits and is a check against the central government. But there are powers in the central government. There are enumerated powers listed in the Constitution. One of the weaknesses, supposedly, of the Articles of Confederation, that which governed the United States between the time it was independent and the time that the Constitution was ratified, was that it didn't do a good job of fulfilling the natural powers of a central government. And so they needed to create a stronger central government. But in doing so, they set the stage for the growth of the federal government. And that's where we are. Please understand that to say this is not the federal government's job is not to say it's nobody's job. Not at all. It's important. It's vitally important that we maintain sphere sovereignty. That because someone fails in one arena, we don't just call in the next arena over to take over. So, federalism is a good ideology. By the way, a one that we can see at work as God established the nation of Israel as well, with the 12 tribes. So, today's ism, federalism. Let's get back to it. I gotta tell you, I'm sore. I was out cutting the grass earlier today, and working alongside me out in the yard was my precious wife and our 2 boys that are still at home. Our boys have been working really hard of late. And I'm glad, because I think it's important for us to model for and to teach our children to be hardworking and diligent. Not long ago, I read a poll that asked parents what one thing they believed was the most important to provide for their children. Those outside the church gave as their top answer a good education. Those inside the church gave as their answer a good education. We have been taught to believe that a good education is what will cure whatever ails us. It will persuade us to believe that we shouldn't smoke. It will persuade us not to do drugs. It'll teach us how to eat properly. And it will, in the end, be the very key of our future prosperity. Get a good education and get a good, high-paying job. Get a good, high-paying job, and you will have a good life. The Bible, however, offers no such calculus. It does not suggest that getting a good education is the key to prosperity, far less that it is the key to having a good life. Our problem, according to the Bible, isn't that we don't know the truth, but that we will not submit to it. See Romans 1. Our problem, friends, is rebellion, not ignorance. Now, the Bible does call us to diligent labor. From God's command in the garden to the call to do our work as unto the Lord. In turn, it suggests that one of the great blessings in this world is to eat of the fruit of our labors in peace. It explains that we will prosper as we consume less than we produce, and we will fall into hardship as we consume more than we produce. The Bible, in turn, commands that we look to it for all our answers. For the good of our own families, and for the good of the families of our children, we must model for them what it means to be diligent in our labors. They will learn to do an honest day's work for an honest day's pay as we demonstrate the same to them, not from lectures from us. We must also expect the same from them. We live in a culture driven toward recreation. We work for the weekend rather than resting that we might work. We can overcome this cultural drift as we delay gratification, as we work now and play later. We can push back against this folly as we rejoice in a job well done. When we collapse into bed at the end of the day, exhausted, which I'm looking forward to, we tend to think something must be wrong. Being tired at the end of the day is a sign of blessing, not curse. Friends, our children learn by watching us. Our work in teaching them, then, is never through. As we labor diligently, God will bless us. He will bless us first in our own homes, but He will in turn teach our children to do the same. And when that time comes, He will bless their own homes as well. Hard work and sound saving is the path to prosperity. It always has been and always will be. Shortcuts lead only to disaster.
You've been listening to the Jesus Changes Everything podcast, a production of Dunamis Fellowship, the teaching outreach of Dr. R.C. Sproul Jr. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we encourage you to subscribe, which you can do at all the usual outlets, to tell your friends, and to spread the word. To learn more about the work of Dunamis Fellowship, please visit rcsproulJR.com. And join us next time on Jesus Changes Everything.